Go live to Times Square. My colleagues James Morrow, Rita Panahi with me. Rita, we discussed this last time, but Florida, it looks like the Cubans, the Hispanics coming home for Donald Trump today.
Oh, absolutely. He's doing very well with that Hispanic vote, not just in Florida, but elsewhere in the country. The Democrats are still getting the bulk of that vote, but the margin has decreased considerably from 2016. And of course, in Florida, you've got a large Cuban population, Cuban-American population, and they are very much afraid of some of the socialist, far-left policies that members of the Democrats have embraced. So I think that's helped Trump along.
Well, I think that has. You know, we also talked about the Florida Panhandle effect. Those votes are going to come in late. But another interesting point about Florida is that the African American vote is now substantially higher this year for Trump than it was 4 years ago. If that portends other things in urban communities around the United States, that is also, I think, important for the Republicans. And
it's astonishing to see that, given we've had 4 years of hearing nothing but how racist he is, how divisive he is, how he's pouring fuel on the fire of racial division. But I think people can see through that. We've had, under his administration, the lowest black unemployment rate ever, before COVID hit, obviously, but that is something that people notice.
That was a false narrative, too, a lot of that, because, you know, the economy was very, very strong for African Americans. It was exceedingly strong when it came to employment for them. It was exceedingly strong for all of these things, as well as, you know, things such as prison reform. And you'll have to excuse us, there's a car race going on in the background here,
We're
too.
In Times Square. It is crazy.
It's a little bit manic here. But so there's a lot happening here, but also a lot happening tonight in the election. So the African-American vote, I think, has started to come home. And we saw also, just over the last year or so, a lot of prominent African-American activists now switching their support to Trump and saying, you know, the Democrats have taken us for granted for too long. I think that's an important thing, Rita, that Trump has done.
Oh, yes, but you cannot discount that media narrative. It has been so relentlessly negative, particularly around race relations, and you wonder what that black vote would have been without that.
Well, you do, but, you know, at the same time, more and more people are realizing, I think, in the wake of those George Floyd riots that happened earlier this year, that really the worst place for African Americans is in Democrat-run cities. Democrat-run cities have absolutely the worst outcomes, and they're starting to ask, well, why is our leadership failing us like this? And I think we are seeing that with small numbers, but significant numbers in some of the voting. I would be very curious to see how those numbers play out, not just across Florida, but in other jurisdictions around the country.
And James, Texas, North Carolina, what do you make of those early numbers out of those two states?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, Texas is a huge state. Texas, I think, has always been assumed to be in Trump's column. Now, there will be a lot of urban votes, a lot of urban boos, as always, as we discussed the last time, that are going to be Democrat. And the thing is that Texas has also, interestingly and ironically, there's this sort of purple Americans phenomenon where Americans who have fled, you know, the high tax, high regulation jurisdictions in California then move to places like Texas because the economic climate is more favorable, the lifestyle is more favorable. But then, you know, like turkeys voting for Christmas, then go and vote for the same policies that screwed up the last place they lived. So, you know, there is a bit of that going on. But I think that once that starts to come out, I'm seeing that most of the projections that I'm seeing are showing Texas and goes to Trump. North Carolina as well. The numbers don't look great for Trump at the moment, and yet a lot of the models that I'm seeing now are putting that narrowly in the Trump win column.
I tell you, with Texas, and we're seeing this elsewhere in the country, if Trump does somehow win this, he's got to build a wall around California. Forget about Mexico. Build a wall around California. Stop those people going elsewhere and turning those red states blue.
Actually, one state governor did have a proposal that anybody who moves in from California has to wait 10 years before they're allowed to vote in the state, just so that they can, you know, learn the new way of life.